Hello, friends and adventurers. Our podcast has been supported for months now by Misty Mountain Gaming, and they're now rewarding you, our listeners, with savings on all their fine D&D products such as metal dice, stone dice, glass dice, miniatures, adventures, dice trays, and more. You can use the code TWINS10, that's TWINS10, to save 10% on all purchases made in their online store at mistymountaingaming.com. Every code redeemed helps support Steven and I, and encourages us to make more and better content for you. So be sure to use code TWINS10 whenever you're buying premium Dungeons & Dragons dice and gear from our good friends at mistymountaingaming.com. Okay, on with the show.
Welcome back, listeners, players, DMs, and One D&D playtesters to another episode of Bardic Twinspiration. That's right, there is still more to discuss in this newest playtest packet that Wizards of the Coast has just released. Last episode, we talked about druids, and now we're moving on to the next class that they have given us to review, that being my favorite class in the game, the Paladin. As always, I am joined by my brother, Rob, the D&D wannabe.
Hello! Steve, I know you're really excited to finally get to talk about this one. We haven't done anything celebrating the individual classes outside of this playtest material, and I know you have a very special relationship with the Paladin class.
Yes, while I am still the most curious about how One D&D is going to handle the mages classes, I am most excited to get my hands on the Paladin class. So I'm glad that they didn't make us wait forever to take a look at what their ideas are for how the Paladin should be integrated in One D&D. So before we get started talking about what the new Paladin looks like, Rob, give me your impressions on the 5e Paladin so that we know where we're starting from.
So the 5e Paladin, and this is not news to anyone who has played this class in 5e or who has played alongside one of these classes in 5e, it's the battle class. If you are wanting to shine outside of combat, there are other classes for you. If you are wanting to shine after initiative has been rolled, sometimes literally, the Paladin is the way to go. It does have some wonderful roleplay hooks, it has a lot of potential, and as a half-classed charisma-based caster, they can shine in social encounters, but taking damage, mitigating damage, avoiding damage, and most importantly, dealing damage is the bread and butter of the Paladin. If you are looking to deal an incredible amount of damage in a single round of combat, your multi-class involves Divine Smite.
In previous editions of D&D, and I believe that it still holds true with 5th edition as well, a common question when forming a party has historically been, okay, who's going to be the Paladin? And there's a pretty good reason for that. The Paladin is part of the conversation in so many different aspects of the game. They fulfill the role of the damage dealer. They fulfill the role of the tank, or at least as close as D&D has to tanks. And they can fulfill the role of the party's face. They can even be a healer or a support caster in a pinch. There's not much that the Paladin doesn't do a decent job of, so it's the perfect catch-all class to fill in whatever gaps that your party might have. Now, my personal impression of the 5th edition Paladin is absolutely favorable, but if I'm being honest with myself, I think I have to admit that it might have been too good. Like, maybe not quite as broken as the 5th edition Druid was, but I think that in this packet, they're handing us two classes that may have deserved some retooling, a little bit of a rework, a little bit of rebalancing moving into One D&D.
And that's something that's kind of new territory for One D&D and the classes they've given us, because clearly the Bard and the Ranger from 5th edition had some room for improvement. They might have needed a little bit of help. The Rogue and the Cleric, I mean, kind of for the most part, they kind of left them alone. I feel like they felt like they kind of got it in one with 5th edition. Here with the Druid and the Paladin, we're taking some classes that excelled in 5th edition and trying to bring them kind of back down to earth, kind of into the realm of mortals, as it were, and balance them with the rest of the classes.
As we move forward, looking into the Paladin as presented in this playtest material, I want you to keep in mind what the Wizards of the Coast design team's goals were. When looking at the Paladin, they said that they saw a myriad of features that you had to keep track of. You have your lay on hands pool, you have your channel divinity, you have your divine sense uses, you have your spell slots. All this and more that a Paladin has to keep track of. And as they're looking at how they want the Paladin to be presented in the future, they're hoping to simplify that, to make things a little bit more integrated and give you more options for what to do with it. Looking through this playtest packet, I can see all of that in our future, as well as some nerfs.
Let's go ahead and address kind of the design philosophy while we're on that subject. The Paladin has been placed in the priest group. And as we said with the Druid, the goal is to make classes in the priest group be able to provide defense, healing, and utility across the game in all situations. I don't know if this was their intent in 5th edition or not, but I think of the Paladin as a martial class. I think that their function in 5th edition was to take and deal damage. And that is not the design philosophy that the Paladin was approached with going into 1D&D, and as we get into the features, that's going to show.
Well, I can definitely see why you felt that way in 5th edition, because I've practically written an essay on how using Divine Smite is the best thing that you can do with your spell slots.
Yeah.
And Divine Smite is just a damage-dealing ability. Like, it doesn't have any other nuance to it. You point at something, and it becomes slightly to drastically more dead.
And in kind of a druid wild shape kind of way, that one thing that this class could do wound up just kind of taking over the rest of the class, right? It didn't matter that the Paladin was a spellcasting class, because where did those spell slots go? They got converted to damage and applied to whatever weapon the Paladin was holding.
As we take a look at the Paladin as presented in this playtest material, we're going to see that they kind of took the opposite approach they did with the Druid. The Druid's key feature was identified as the wild shape, and then everything that they unlocked as part of their progression became about wild shape. In 5th edition, the Paladin's features didn't really focus on Divine Smite, and that is still going to be the case here. They're just going to emphasize other aspects of the Paladin's kit to make them feel a little bit more multifaceted. And as Rob said when we were looking at the Cleric in the last release, those of you who liked the Paladin in 5th edition will probably still like the Paladin in 1D&D because it feels very similar. Like I said, there have been some balance changes that there's a lot of people that aren't excited about them. We'll get into our opinions here shortly.
Let's go ahead and start digging into the Paladin then, but before we get into the class features, I'm going to do my little hot take here at the beginning, and this is an issue I even had with the Paladin in 5th edition. The oaths. I don't love that the source of power for the Paladin is a promise they make to themselves. I don't see where the power comes from there. I can understand on an intellectual level.
It's willpower. It's conviction.
Yeah, but does conviction really translate to radiant power? I mean, so let's say, and this is an egregious and erroneous example, but the way that paladins currently work, I don't see why it wouldn't work. Let's say that a paladin swears an oath that every week they will take out the garbage. And they do that. They mean that with all of their soul, and they speak it with such conviction, and all of a sudden they gain radiant powers and the ability to wield weapons and armor and summon spectral steeds. And they are the coolest garbage paladin that there is out there in the land. And then one day, they don't take out the garbage. And not only, they don't lose their divine powers, no. Instead, they become an oath-breaker garbage paladin, and now their lack of conviction to take out the garbage gives them new powers. Like, Something about that just doesn't jive with me. It doesn't make sense. I can't justify it in my head. Now, I can see why you may not want to tie yourself to a divine power or an archfey, or, that's stepping a little bit into the warlock territory. But I think there are good roleplay hooks for the paladin if they follow maybe a more traditional route as to where their power comes from.
Yeah, I don't know, man. It all seems to track pretty well to me. I'm gotta say though, I'm not such a big fan of you using garbage and paladin like in the same sentence so close to each other over and over again. However, if there was gonna be one class in D&D whose main job was to take out the trash, this would be it.
Well, all right. I'm not gonna harp on that through the rest of the episode. Probably. I don't know. No amounts of paragraphs in 5e and no amounts of paragraphs in One D&D have explained how this should work from a narrative perspective well enough to me.
Look, maybe it doesn't bother me as much as perhaps it should, because it is stated that this is a priest that is casting from the divine spell list. So it's obvious where they're getting their power from. The difference between a cleric and a paladin isn't that distinct to me, because the cleric follows a domain, and that is associated with certain deities within the D&D pantheon, but it doesn't mandate who you follow, right? You can choose the deity that you're following as long as you adhere to your domain. And I think of Paladin as very much the same way. By virtue of this conviction, you have impressed some deity within the pantheon, and they have basically decided to sponsor you. As long as you uphold your oath, this deity is going to confer upon you these abilities. From my perspective, it's not that different from cleric. It's not really that different from warlock.
And it shouldn't be that different from cleric because they share the channel divinity feature. And if at any point that had been made clear, kind of those concepts that you are espousing there in the actual text, I think maybe things would be a little better off. Instead, But anyway, let's dig into what this playtest packet actually offers to Paladins.
Hey, you know what I like about the Paladin starting equipment, Rob? That you start with a shield. You started with that proficiency in 5th edition, but you didn't start with the item. Granted, you could buy it with your starting gold, but it's nice to just have that integral part of what makes a classic Paladin actually represented in your starting equipment. Now you can go and take that gold and spend it on something else, and you don't have to worry about whether or not you walked through a town on your way from session 0 to session 1.
Again, like many different times, level 1 doesn't look too much different. You're still starting out with the same number of hit points, you're still starting out with the same saving throws, even the same weapon proficiencies, armor training, and options of skills to choose from.
So like I said, this is all very familiar ground that we're treading, especially at the start.
And that is going to continue with the first level Paladin's Lay on Hand feature. If you liked this absolute banger of a class ability in 5th edition, it is pretty much the same going through here. You're going to get a pool of hit points based on your Paladin level that you are able to transfer to yourself or to other members of your party to heal them or to remove negative effects like the poison condition, which is the only option available to you at first level.
Yeah, I note that they removed 5th edition Paladin's ability to spend points from their Lay on Hands pool in order to cure diseases. Interesting that that's gone. I don't feel like that was hurting anything, unless they're going to tell me that diseases don't exist in One D&D, or that the diseases that do exist are going to have some incredibly complicated way to get rid of them. I don't know how much I'm going to miss that. I don't know that I've ever used it that way before. I just also don't feel like it's really hurting anything, so.
I don't know. I would love to see both poisons and diseases take a little bit more center stage in future editions of D&D. And one of the reasons that they've been trivialized in 5th edition was the Paladin's ability to so simply make them go away. So maybe diseases will take a little bit more prominence now.
You know what? I think I actually have used it before, because I'm realizing that I think I used it to cure someone being infected with slot eggs. because that technically counted as a disease, and that would have been pretty bad if that had gone through. So I'm assuming there's going to be slot in One D&D, and I'm going to wish that was there. But like Rob said, other than that, Lay on Hands is extremely familiar. You get a pool of hit points that you can restore to yourself or other party members equal to 5 times your Paladin level. You can distribute those as many as you want, be it one at a time or all at once as an action. And you can expend 5 points at once to remove the poison condition. It might not be the thing that Paladins are like the most famous for, but it is certainly one of my most used features that they unlock.
Let's go from something that's the same to something that is different now. The first level Paladin is missing the Divine Sense feature. That has not gone away, but it has been moved down the level progression. But to soften that blow, something else has been moved up the level progression, namely the Paladin's ability to access spellcasting.
Yes, praise be to whoever we have sworn our oath to.
The garbage!
Because now the spellcasting feature and the Divine Smite feature don't come in at the same time. Now you get spellcasting even earlier here at level 1, meaning that as a prepared spellcaster, you get 2 first level spell slots and can memorize 2 first level spells from the Divine Spell list.
But wait, there's more!
There sure is, Rob. Because Paladins are going to get the same treatment as their half-caster brethren, the Ranger, and they are now going to get access to a previously full caster exclusive feature. Cantrips. Cantrips, Rob.
Paladins get cantrips. Paladins can cast spells as often as they want. Granted, they're divine cantrips, and the list is fairly short there.
Boy, is it.
But, oh man, Paladins getting access to this feature at all is huge. And the fact that you have a level of getting to enjoy spells as a Paladin before Divine Smite is even an option gives you an opportunity to sort of prioritize that aspect of the character and explore spells before deciding that you want to spend all of your spell slots on smiting.
Rob's right. The divine spell list is very light on cantrips, which is something they can always come back and add to later on, but as it's currently presented, the list is pretty thin. But you know what is listed on there, guys? Both the new and improved One D&D guidance and the new and improved One D&D resistance, both of which you can use as reactions and both of which Rob and I have previously stated as being some of the biggest improvements moving into One D&D. Additionally, you also get access to the Spare the Dying cantrip, which has gotten a little bit of a facelift here in this playtest material. Whereas in 5th edition, Spare the Dying would simply stabilize a comrade who had fallen in battle, the new Spare the Dying will actually pick them back up with a single hit point.
This is wild. All right, like it only works on characters who are down. You cannot spam a cantrip to heal your party to full. But when cast on a dying creature stops dying and comes back with 1 hit point. This is so good, I think it's too good. But you can't argue that it's not good.
It's practically point blank healing word, right? I mean, yeah, healing word technically heals for more, but I mean, it heals for so little it might as well just heal you 1 hit point. I mean, right? I mean, like any monster is basically going to be able to knock you back down to 0 hit points unless you just happen to roll maximum or upcast the spell. So the fact that you have this on tap as long as they're within 5 feet of you is an out and out improvement. The fact that you can stop someone from dying was possibly worth taking, maybe, if you kind of stretched it a little bit. You know, at least you didn't have to worry about retiring a character, retiring them 6 feet under. But the fact that you can now pick them up and make them combat ready again is huge.
Steve has said so many times on this podcast and away from the microphone that no hit point matters but the last one. And now you have unlimited last ones by having someone in your party take this cantrip, and it is available at first level to all Paladins now.
So, first level Paladins, feeling pretty good. Moving on to 2nd level, things only get better from here. Just like in 5th edition, you're going to pick up a fighting style here at level 2. As with the Ranger, we know that the fighting styles are now feats that are warrior exclusive, but this feature is going to allow you to override that and have your pick of the litter.
Not only that, you are going to get the option to continue to pick additional fighting styles as you continue to have the opportunity to pick up feats, allowing you to kind of run the gamut of different martial disciplines. And with One D&D, we are going to see a wider array of fighting style feats available to you than when I started playing in 5th edition with just the ones that appeared in the player's handbook. So just about any vision that you have for your paladin, you are going to be able to make it come to life in a more realistic way, especially when we start looking at new opportunities for how your weapons will interact with smites and different spells. The paladin is really going to start opening up. And that starts with these fighting styles here at level 2.
Right. Back in 5th edition, you had to choose from a short list of fighting styles, whereas now you can pick any of them, even say the archery fighting style. But Steve, you say, why the heck would I want to take an archery fighting style as a paladin? Well, let me tell you, listener, it's because, like Rob said, we're changing up how Divine Smite works. Previously in 5th edition, Divine Smite was a little extra stank that you could put on your attacks, dealing some extra damage at the cost of your spell slots whenever you hit an enemy with a melee weapon attack. Here in 1D&D, some of those restrictions have been removed.
This is perhaps the biggest glow up that the Paladin is going to get as we go through their level progression, in my mind, and that comes in the form of new versatility in how you employ your smites. Formerly, Paladins were basically shoehorned into melee weapons. If you envisioned in your head a multi-class with a monk where you could apply Divine Fury to your fists, or if you thought that ranged combat was pretty cool, and who needs a big armor class when you are 150 feet away from your target, and wanted to employ your paladin in that direction, most of your damage-dealing class features and spells didn't come along with you. And that was a very intentional design change going into 1D&D. Now Divine Smite supports both unarmed strikes and thrown and ranged weapon attacks.
Those of you who were playing Paladins in 5th edition and felt a little bit pigeonholed into the sword and board play style can now sit back and relax as a holy sniper. Now, this versatility does not come without a cost. There have been 2 additional changes to Divine Smite that are intended to kind of scale things back a bit. Firstly, and least concerningly, Divine Smite in 5th edition used to deal additional damage when the target that you used it on was a fiend or undead. Now in 1D&D, that is completely gone. The damage is always 2d8 per first level spell slot plus 1d8 for each slot of a higher level.
If you have run a game for a player who was a paladin in your game, you have heard the question, is it a fiend or an undead? Is it a fiend or an undead?
Is it an undead or maybe a fiend?
Is it a fiend? Or maybe perhaps an undead? And that was because paladins were so excited for 1 extra d8 damage, which could become an extra 2d8 if they lucked out and crit on that attack. And rightly so, but the holy warrior who puts the nastiest things in the world back where they belong is not the paladin identity anymore. Again, we are focusing on healing, defense, and utility. So conditional damage, I mean, if even the ranger is not doing conditional damage based on enemy types, Lord knows the paladin is not going to be. So that's been pulled away. But as Steve said, this is not the change where the most controversy has been sparked.
Not the most egregious nerf by any means. You tell them, Rob. I don't know if I can even talk about it.
The thing that has Paladin fans up in arms is, in my mind, not the worst change in the world, but a hallmark of the Paladin used to be multiple attacks and the opportunity to smite on each one of them. Furthermore, you have the opportunity to declare a smite when your attack lands, which means you could use spells to soup those attacks up and then expend extra slots to stack smite on top of it, leading to, frankly, insane damage being applied to single attacks while you're getting multiple attacks per turn. It was one of the greatest challenges to balance encounters to challenge the rest of the party when a paladin rolls up and rolls up. Now, Divine Smite has the limitation that it can only be utilized once per turn, and cannot be used on a turn where you cast a spell.
Look at this, listener. Do you see what they've done? Look how they massacred my boy.
Oh, gosh. So dramatic.
Oh.
It's a balance change.
Okay, this hurts a lot. It's really taking the Paladin down a peg in terms of the damage potential that they could put out in a single round. And I will be the first to admit that the Paladin needed some rebalancing. The amount of damage that they could output could be obscene with a little bit of multi-classing or with some really good rolls. And honestly, I expected this. I mentally prepared myself for it and was not surprised when it showed up. Do you think, Rob, that this is the correct and appropriate answer to the Divine Smite problem?
Much like with the Druid, I think they are addressing the correct issues. Whether or not they have found the correct answer, I'm not exactly prepared to say. Casting spells and smite on the same turn never bothered me as the dungeon master. I don't have one of those minds that seeks ways to break the game, so I have not currently conceived of the way that would really be the worst thing in the world if that were to be permitted to stay. However, multiple Divine Smites per turn. The Wizards of the Coast designers have gone on record saying that Divine Smite was abused in 5th edition, and that while they never felt the need to errata and fix the Divine Smite, it was being used in ways that they never intended to be possible. So the fact that they have swung a little hard to really rein this back in makes sense to me. And here's the thing. If it doesn't change, if it stays in this current iteration, I believe it is pushing the Paladin in the direction of being a priest and not a martial class. If that is the direction that the Paladin class is meant to go, this is a good step and it is fine. If the Paladin is meant to be more of a divine warrior and less of a battle priest, if you pardon the very similar analogies here, then maybe we should be giving some power back to it.
I think that the Paladin has always been intended to be the bridge between those two worlds, between the martial classes and the priests. Similar to the way that the Ranger, I believe, is supposed to be the bridge between the expert classes and the warriors. And I would be sad to see them lose that. And I don't think that in this current iteration they are in any danger of losing that, which is good. As we move forward, we're still going to see things that emphasize both their role in supporting the party and their role in dealing damage. And you're right, the interview with Kenrick and Crawford did specifically mention that Divine Smite was never really intended to be used on multiple times per turn, so that is something that they're looking to dial back in. I think that is exactly the change that they should have made. They should have limited Divine Smite to a single use per turn. Now, the fact that they're also adding in the stipulation that you cannot also cast spells on the same turn, I take a little bit of issue with that. I think that is probably unnecessary. I can tell you why they're doing it that way. The reason that they've implemented this is to prevent you from using Divine Smite and the other Paladin Smite spells on the same turn, because that was a very popular thing to do as a Paladin. This is kind of double down. You cast one of the Smite spells, you hit someone with it, and then you add an additional Divine Smite on top of that, and that's where a lot of that kind of Nova-style damage was coming from. And I don't know, I feel like maybe doing that once per turn is not nearly as egregious as it used to be when you were able to do it multiple times per turn, thanks to being a 5th or higher level Paladin and getting extra attack, or thanks to some benefits of multiclassing, haste, things like that. My main concern is that if you did opt to be a Paladin that multiclassed and did get some spells that you could cast on a bonus action or a reaction, because let's be honest, looking over the Divine Spell lists, there aren't very many that are set up that way, then that would start limiting your ability to do both of those on the same turn. I am, however, extremely grateful that they did not give Divine Smite the sneak attack treatment, where it could only be used once per round. This means that if you do get an attack later on a reaction or something, you can still add Divine Smite to that.
Interesting that you refer to them as the Paladin Smite spells, because they are divine smite spells at this point. That is going to open them up to members of the cleric class and give some more martial and damage output opportunities there. And there have been changes to the smite spells in this playtest material, but we're going to come back to them a little bit later on. For now, let's stick with the Paladin and make our way to level 3. Third level, as usual, is going to give us access to our Paladin subclass. Now, baked into every Paladin subclass was the ability to channel divinity in 5th edition. That is no longer tied to your subclass. That is a standard Paladin feature to offer a little bit more uniformity, and you are still getting access to channel divinity here at 3rd level, along with an additional spell to prepare and an additional spell slot here at 3rd level.
Right. Like you said, the channel divinity had historically only been a subclass feature of the Paladins, but now you get it before that. And why would you get it before that? Well, it's because they're going to give you a universal channel divinity feature that all Paladins will get access to. And here we see that this is where Divine Sense comes back to us. But it doesn't just come back to us a couple of levels later than we had it before. Oh no! It comes back new and improved. Divine Sense 2.0, baby. This is the Divine Sense that I wanted and didn't get in 5th edition.
Perhaps one of the most important changes is moving Divine Sense over to your bonus action and giving you the opportunity to act immediately on the information that you receive when you use this Channel Divinity option. You are able to detect fiends, celestials, and undead within 60 feet of yourself. That much is unchanged. However, you now no longer have to have line of sight to these creatures. You can feel their presence around corners and through walls. And it is not an instantaneous effect. It's going to be switched on for the next 10 minutes.
That is the reason that I never used Divine Sense in 5th edition. I honestly don't think I used it once, because basically what it's good for in 5th edition is getting a vibe check on a room or the person who is standing right in front of you. This is going to allow you to activate the feature, and like you said, if there is someone standing right in front of you, you will be able to act upon it immediately, and if there's not, you will be able to leave in search of them. So let's say that you are at some sort of masquerade ball or something like that, and you and your party are on the trail of a Rakshasa who can use illusory magics in order to conceal their identity, or perhaps a vampire or something like that. And you need to determine where in this palace they're hiding. In 5th edition, you would basically just walk around doing little sonar pings every once in a while, as often as you could, and spreading yourself out as much as possible. Whereas now, you just use the feature once, and you walk throughout all of the rooms until you sense their presence.
Right. This is now functional not just in the immediate area, but this is now a dungeon exploration tool. 10 minutes is long enough to cover several combats in quick succession and to make your way through a larger dungeon or building. Your example was pretty much the example that I had in my head. I'm now using this to hunt something down rather than just checking if anything is nearby.
Conversely, if you are exploring a dungeon, you can now detect the presence of undead through walls. That's pretty good. That's going to come in handy at some point.
Stop. My divine sense is tingling. There are undead on the other side of this door.
The oath of the friendly neighborhood paladin? You getting the Peter tingle?
My garbage tingle is...
I never really thought about the fact that the paladins didn't really have an exploration feature and that this is giving them one. That's pretty cool. That just is more situations where the paladin is going to come in handy.
You're also getting access to Oath of Devotion, because that is the subclass that we have been presented with. Subclass features starting at this level. As with the subclasses in 5th edition, your oath is going to come with some particular spell selections that will become available to you when you reach certain levels in the class. At 3rd level, you are going to gain the spells Protection from Evil and Good and Shield of Faith. Not only are these spells going to perpetually be prepared for you and not count against the spells you have to prepare each day, but you are also now offered a free casting of one of these spells once per long rest. So now you have a casting of a spell that you can't spend on a Divine Smite. We are pushing the Paladin towards actually utilizing its cool spell list.
Which I think is a great move, because in contrast to some of the things they've been doing with these classes, granting these free castings is incentivizing you to interact with a different part of your character sheet while also not taking anything away from what you previously had in mind to do with those spell slots. There is now no penalty, perceived or otherwise, when you cast, say, Protection from Evil and Good or Shield of Faith, which, by the way, both of those were practically auto-includes on every Paladin that I've ever played, so the fact that they are both always going to be on my spell list is only going to encourage me to branch out more with my other spell slots and my other prepared spells. Oath of Devotion starting out pretty strong.
But that's not all. You're also seeing Sacred Weapon return from the Oath of Devotion. This has a little bit of a glow up just in the first 4 words, in that it activates as a bonus action. Everything is getting out of the way of the Paladin being able to attack with its action each turn. You spend your Channel Divinity, so you're using this as one of your 2 uses. I don't think that we mentioned that it was 2.
Oh, we didn't mention that it's 2. Guys, at the first level where you unlock your Channel Divinity, you're already getting double the uses that you used to get in 5th edition. And just like what happened with the Cleric last episode, it's only going to get better from there. Previously in 5th edition, it was 1 use per short rest, and now it is 2 uses per, I think it's still per short rest, isn't it?
Per long rest, but if you take a short rest and you have spent one of those uses, you are going to get 1 back.
Which means that if we continue to operate on the assumption that you're going to get at least 2 short rests per day, that's going to be 4 uses of Channel Divinity per day, which is amazing. That's a ton of Divine Senses, while also having this Sacred Weapon feature available when the combat does come around. As a Paladin player, I wanted to make sure that I always had access to my Channel Divinity anytime we went into combat, because, I was playing Oath of Vengeance Paladins, and I always wanted to have Vow of Enmity on deck. So even as a Paladin, I was already wanting to take short rests about as often as a Warlock. I usually multi-class into Warlock, so I guess that's neither here nor there, but this is just huge. I mean, I don't really know how else to say it. Immediately, at 3rd level, you're getting to use your Channel Divinity twice as often as a 20th level Paladin in 5th edition. Okay, sorry, go ahead. You can talk now.
I am glad you are so excited about that. But getting back to Sacred Weapon, sir, as a bonus action, you can use Channel Divinity to empower a weapon that you are holding. Now, here we see the unarmed option going away. Ranged, fine. Melee, fine. Unarmed, not as fine. But you empower that weapon with positive energy, and for the next minute, on top of your proficiency bonus, on top of your strength or possibly dexterity modifier, you also get to add your charisma modifier to your rolls made to hit with that weapon. And when you do hit, because you probably will, you can cause the damage of that weapon type to change to radiant damage if you feel that is more exciting or appropriate for the scenario that you're in.
In addition, your weapon is going to shed 20 feet of bright light and 20 feet of dim light beyond that. And this feature ends if you choose to end it as a bonus action whenever you drop the weapon or whenever you become incapacitated. I do want to go back to that thing that you said a second ago, because it's weird to me that Kenrick and Crawford, in their interviews discussing this playtest material, seemed very proud of the fact that they were now providing some monk paladin support, with these unarmed strikes, or, maybe not specifically monk paladin, but opening up that sort of brawler play style, right? And yet, as we go through these features, the only place that we're going to see that support is right there at level 2 when the Divine Smite feature is first introduced. After that, whenever the class adds additional features to attacks, it is always added exclusively to weapon attacks.
They do promise in this playtest packet that they're going to be reevaluating some of their weapons. Maybe we're going to see some brass knuckles show up that count as weapons and unarmed strikes. I don't know.
That's actually kind of a popular homebrew item, so that monks and things can get like a +1 to their stuff, like whether it's like a claw or a katar or brass knuckles or something like that.
Who knows? Maybe we'll see it. Either way, that is how this particular effect is going to work. Like it or leave it.
Now, Oath of Devotion fans from 5th edition might notice that the secondary Channel Divinity option that the subclass afforded you, namely Turn the Unholy, is noticeably missing here. Well, that's because, just like we used to get 2 Channel Divinity options at level 3, we are now still getting 2 Channel Divinity options at level 3. It's just that one of them is that Divine Sense feature. But for those of you who really enjoyed it, don't worry. There is going to be something that is somewhat similar and is really going to soften the blow of losing that, although it comes in much, much later on in your Paladin's progression, it is a strict improvement. So look forward to that when we get to it. In the meantime, let's go ahead and take a look at what a 4th level Paladin is going to unlock, which I'm sure is going to be something novel and groundbreaking.
Nope. Feet.
Yep, feet, just like it is for every other class in the game. This is nothing new, and it is one of the things that is the most consistent about a character's level progression. Moving on to 5th level, where characters receive one of their most significant power-ups that they're going to experience throughout their entire progression. Paladins here are going to gain access to 2nd level spells. Their proficiency bonus is going to upgrade to 3 from 2. Their channel divinity uses are also going to upgrade to 3 at this point. They're going to unlock extra attack, and they're going to gain the Paladin's first all-new feature since cantrips way back at level 1.
Cool. So, this does not excite me in the slightest.
For shame.
That is just the way that I approach Paladins. This is the way that I think of Paladins. But somebody out there, possibly a Steve on this podcast, is going to be really excited about this. And whether or not it excites me, it is a good feature. Now, you always have a particular spell prepared, once again, that doesn't count against the number of spells you can prepare each day. You can cast it once per long rest without spending a spell slot, similar to how we're doing the special oath spells. And that spell is Find Steed. This is the 5th level Faithful Steed class feature, and the Find Steed spell itself has gotten a little bit of an upgrade to match its place in this class. If you're going to make something a core class feature, it needs a little bit of a bump, and that has been given to this spell.
Find Steed and its older brother Find Greater Steed from 5th edition are hallmarks of the Paladin class. It gives you access to a spectral mount with which you can communicate telepathically over incredible distances that allows you to move around the battlefield as either a controlled or uncontrolled mount, and they can even attack for you. If anything bad should happen to them in combat, that's okay. You can always just come back and cast it again later. The only real disadvantages to having Find Steed in 5th edition were the fact that it cut into your spell slots.
And that you had to learn how mounted combat worked.
Okay, there's no fixing that. It's the fact that it cut into your spell slots to cast a spell, and that the casting time was so long. It took 10 minutes, but 10 minutes can feel like an hour in terms of game time. But using the new Faithful Steed feature, the casting time of Find Steed is always one action for you. That's not just the one time you get to cast it per long rest. It is permanently adjusted to something that you can do during a single turn.
Now we're going to talk about some other ways that this spell is superior to its 5th edition counterpart. So let's go ahead and cover the one way in which I think it is inferior. Previously, when you had this celestial, or perhaps fey or fiendish steed beneath you, you could cause spells that target yourself, presumably buffing spells, defensive spells, maybe even healing magic, to be able to affect your mount as well. That particular little neat feature is absent from the new version of the spell.
And that admittedly was one of the coolest things that you could do with it, because you could cast Shield of Faith on yourself and then that could apply to your steed. You could cast Shield on yourself and that would apply to your steed. You could cast one of your Paladin Smite spells and then that would apply to your steed. All of those abilities made the bond between you and your steed feel special and powerful. And it is now empirically less so in those respects. That said, it's still really good, and the fact that you can do it for free does really soften the blow of what we've lost.
As with many things in One D&D, they're being careful to consolidate pretty much all of the things that you need to know to be able to run this creature in the spell text. For instance, it tells you when your mount acts in combat, what it does if you are ever incapacitated. And if you decide to get rid of it, it's only a bonus action to shunt it away before casting the spell again to be able to recall it to you.
To me, possibly the neatest new feature of the Find Steed spell is that you now have the opportunity to upcast it, meaning that your steed is only going to get better the higher level you become as a paladin and the more resources that you're willing to spend on it. Now, This opens up, once again, the question that we had with the druid and their ability to summon otherworldly familiars for free, whether or not your free casting is at the lowest possible level of the spell or at the highest possible level of the spell. I am still very curious to know how that goes, but either way, I think that it's still a boon.
It's going to be a little bit less of a conversation for paladins when they don't get access to very high-level spells.
It also opens up the question for me of whether or not Find Greater Steed is going to still be a spell in 1D&D, or whether it might just be an upcast version of the normal Find Steed spell. And let's go ahead and take a look at that stat block before we move on, since this is the main part of this feature, is your ability to summon this creature. And you'll see why that question has come to mind.
The level at which you are casting the spell is going to affect your creature's armor class and its hit points. Assuming that it's cast at the lowest possible level, your otherworldly steed will have 12 as its armor class, 10 plus the spell's level, 2, and 25 hit points, 5 plus 10 per level of the spell. And it only goes up from there.
Increasing at a rate of 1 additional armor class and 10 extra hit points per spell level, meaning that casting it as a high-level paladin with a 5th level spell slot, you could achieve an armor class of 15 and a total of 55 hit points. Of course, you can exceed even higher than that if you multi-class. As far as the mount's speed is concerned, it's going to begin with a base walking speed of 60 feet.
Which matches riding horses and war horses, so that is kind of what you ought to expect from this spell. In fact, the ability scores that are offered by this otherworldly steed are also going to be comparable to those of a riding horse or a war horse. High strength, good dexterity and constitution, decent wisdom, and lower other mental ability scores.
Aggressively low intelligence.
On the other hand, we are going to see a new speed offered if you are using a 4th level spell slot or higher. That is certainly going to excite some people and may even change my mind about the spell, in that your mount might come with a fly speed of 60 feet.
Which is fairly consistent with the Find Greater Steed from 5th edition, which was a 4th level spell, and most notably, gave you access to flying mounts. While it was possible to get a fly speed that was higher than 60 feet in 5th edition, I think that coming standard at 60 feet is a very welcome change.
I also think that having a single spell that grows over the course of time, rather than having separate spells and rather than hunting down different stat blocks for different creatures, is preferable. So I like the way they're approaching it here.
Agreed. Very efficient, very clean.
Let's keep going then. Telepathy up to a mile between the caster of the spell and the steed itself. Anything that involves a proficiency bonus, it's going to share your proficiency bonus.
And while we lamented the loss of the Paladins feature that allowed them to impart the benefits of any spell cast upon exclusively them to their mount, we do get a little bit of a consolation prize here in the Life Bond feature that comes standard on any player that casts Find Steed. This feature states that when you regain hit points from a spell of 1st level or higher, your steed also regains the same number of hit points as long as you are within 5 feet of it, which incidentally, you always will be if you're riding it, which you should be.
It's worth noting that this only applies to leveled spells. Class features that offer healing, such as another paladin's Lay on Hands or a druid's Healing Blossoms, do not count. Beyond that, we do have a combat action for our mount. It can do an otherworldly maul, which frankly I think sounds a lot more like a magic item than an attack on my mount stat block, but neither here nor there.
Sounds like an extra-dimensional shopping plaza, which is a place that all campaign settings should have.
Sure. Your summoned mount is going to use your spell attack modifier to hit with its attack, so I hope you didn't dump your charisma.
Perish the thought.
It's going to deal a d8 of damage, plus the level of the spell that you cast Find Steed at, as radiant damage if it's a celestial, as psychic damage if it's a fae, or necrotic damage if it's a fiend, an option you make when you cast the spell. Whatever level you cast Find Steed at, put it somewhere in the margin of your character sheet. Jot that puppy down, because it is going to come up a lot as you get this class feature.
But the choice to make your mount a celestial, fey, or fiend is more important than just the type of damage that you're going to be dealing when they use the otherworldly maul. Because based upon that selection, your mount is going to get an extra feature that they can use once per long rest as a bonus action.
Bonus actions! Everybody gets bonus actions!
Yeah, the designers of One D&D definitely are of the opinion, which, again, I think I stated this in one of the other episodes, which I share, that your action is the main part of your turn. So the more things that you can do without expending the main part of your turn, the better you will feel about using them. Let's go ahead and take a look at some of these options. If you chose Fey as your Spectral Steed's creature type, then you gain the Fey Step ability. The steed gains the ability to teleport to an unoccupied space of your choice up to 60 feet away, along with its rider, Rob. It's a mounted Misty Step. No, I'm sorry, it's a mounted double Misty Step, because the range is 60 feet instead of 30. That is pretty cool.
It's basically a dash action for your mount, where you don't have to deal with anything between point A and point B, which is, very nice, especially if you haven't unlocked flying yet. That's how you get across the chasm. That's how you get to the other side of the enemy lines. That's how you appear right next to the boss without having to deal with all of his minions. This makes a pretty strong argument for just going ahead and being the best option, in my opinion. Not having to deal with the Dungeon Master's map is quite a boon. But that is not your only option. If you selected Fiend, and let's face it, all you edgelords wanted to, then you get Fell Glare as your bonus action. Your steed selects a creature that it can see within 60 feet and force it to make a wisdom saving throw versus the frightened condition, which will stick with it until the end of your next turn. Fairly short duration, has to make a wisdom saving throw against your Paladin spell save DC, but having your opponents frightened of you does have its benefits.
I don't know. I think that this is probably my least favorite of the options, and it's not really even close. I agree that Face Step is probably my favorite, but Fell Glare falls far behind the Celestial option for me, which is Healing Touch. The Celestial Steed touches another creature and restores a number of hit points equal to 2d8 plus the spell's level. Granted, it's not a ton of healing, but anything that you can do as a bonus action that is going to give you the potential to restore a fallen party member and put them back into the fight can't be discounted in my book. And honestly, for a healing ability that doesn't cost a spell slot, this is not an insignificant amount.
Yeah, this is basically a bonus action level 2 Cure Wounds that you didn't have to spend any part of your turn making happen. Now, whichever one of these different types of steed you decide to summon, their bonus action can only be used once per long rest. So whether it's awesome or only okay, be careful about when you're using it, because you're probably getting one today.
You know, the real reason that I like Healing Touch so much is because as the steed's rider, you're always going to be touching the steed, right?
Oh, I don't like the sound of that.
Because if anything happens to you on your turn, your steed can immediately use the Healing Touch feature to restore you to consciousness. And then if you need to return that favor to someone else, you can always go over and use your Lay on Hands. But the Healing Touch makes for a pretty good insurance policy in my book.
If you enjoyed this episode and wish to hear more like it, please consider supporting us on Patreon or on Anchor.fm. You can also support us by using code TWINS10, that's TWINS10, whenever buying dice or other premium Dungeons & Dragons products from MistyMountainGaming.com. Or just by sharing us with your friends. If you'd like to join the conversation, please join our community Discord, or reach out to us on Facebook, Instagram, or Twitter. Links to all of that below the episode. And hey, in case you don't hear it anywhere else this week, we love you guys. Till next time.
Whereas in 5th edition, Spare the Dying would simply stabilize an opponent, simply stabilize a comrade who had fallen in battle. just like in 5th edition, you're going to go... Nope, wait, you used to get it at first level you got your fighting style? Nope, second... Wow, second level Paladins were loaded in 5th edition.
Yeah, they got some stuff.
Why the heck would I want to take an archery fighting style as a Paladin? Well, let me tell you, listener.
We're going to go... without smacking the table?
No.
I'm going to have to crop it out. When your attack lands, which means you could use spells, to soup those attacks up.
My answer had to be really long. I'm hearing my own echo. That's kind of weird. Where's your audio coming from? Test. Okay, well, that's better. No, it's not.
What in the world do you think is like Turn the Unholy that all Paladins are getting?
The 9th level Abjure Foes.
Okay, I have that as a level 3 Vengeance Paladin feature.
They look pretty similar.
But there are similarities. Fair enough.
I guess that one is 60 feet. The Oath of Devotion is 30 feet. This one gives you the opportunity to take the dash action. The Oath of Devotion one might be... The Oath of Vengeance might be more similar.
They shared a name. Abjure Foes, Abjure Enemy.
Oh, close enough, yeah. Well, I can re-record that part.
Find Steed is so far down on my list of cool spells to cast.
It is.
It hasn't shown up in my game since
It
Gore.
is so high on some people's. Well, find Greater Steed anyway, because you can ride a freaking Pegasus. Then you can outrun dragons.